This is Zettelcast, brought to you by readers, writers, thinkers, and teachers from LilyPub, along with our partners in thought, our Zettelkastens. In this show, we share discoveries that our Zettelkastens have shown us.
There you go.
And compare notes on how we're using this marvelous invention in our creative work. Thank you for joining us.
All right, Brooke, do it again.
All right.
Episode 9, Playing with Time.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Zettelcast, where we meet to discuss ideas, and our Zettelkastens are our plus ones. And I'm Mel Jeffcoat. I'm hosting today. And for our first activity, we're going to play a game called Where Would You File This? So I have supplied a quote for a main card, and the activity is to for each of us to find where we would place this in our Zettelkasten and what would be the parent, and also to supply a reaction to the quote, as you should do on your main cards to make it, living and part of your ideas. So with that said, is there anybody who would like to go first? Oh, sorry, I should read the card first so that we know what we're filing. Okay, so this is a quote from the foreword of the book Time Shifting, which is written by Stephen Rechtschaffen, and it was in the 90s that this came out. I'd never heard of it. I ran across it at a used bookstore and said, oh, that seems interesting. Create more time to enjoy your life. That sounds like a great idea, right? The book itself is not that, it might have been groundbreaking in the 90s, I'm not sure, but a lot of the ideas are stuff that's very familiar at this point. But in the foreword by Thomas More, which was a beautifully written foreword, there was this quote towards the end where he said, "Time need not be imagined in modern terms only as an abstract structure into which life is poured. This is a serious old man's saturnine version of time. We might also think of time as a child at play, full of unknowing chance and serendipity." Now, would anybody like to share where they would file that?
Well, let me say that I said, okay, it's either in experiencing, because you can experience any number of things. So you can have it's feasible to have a category called experiencing. It's also feasible to have a category called time, So I didn't have time to decide yet, Mel, but I was thinking along those terms. And I was also going back and forth with myself, thinking in terms, okay, now how do I respond to this? And I said, okay, it's subjective time and objective time. There's supposedly there's less and less and less and less belief, as I understand it, in objective time. Everything is supposed to be subjective time. So basically, if you believe it or if you're happy, things go quick. If you're sad, things go slow, that kind of thing. And so I'm saying, okay, well, what's my response to this? But that's all the quote is saying. It's saying, don't get stuck in objective time, think in terms of subjective time. And the book is saying, okay, use meditation, use journaling, you do things that settle your mind and think in terms of being present. Don't think about yesterday, don't think about tomorrow, think about where you are now. So I said, yeah. It's like I don't have there's nothing earth shaking there to me, it's just okay, and that's where I am with that.
Thanks, Deb.
Yep. You're welcome.
Kathleen, I saw you raise your hand a little bit just earlier.
Okay.
You got something?
I had fun with it, and I thought I would share my process. I'll go to my down-facing camera so that I can show you my cards my process for finding a place for it, and the card that this card chose for its parent. Okay. This is the card that came from Mel. Thank you, Mel. And I have the quote as being the first part of the card. And I indicated where it came from. And I needed a second card for my reaction to it. And my reaction to it, it reminded me of another quote. And this quote was from Bobby Fischer, the US world champion of chess, who kind of had a flash and then gone career in chess. And he was rather noted for, after having won the World Chess Championship, he then defaulted and didn't show up for his match against Anatoly Karpov, who became world champion by default, the first time that had ever happened. And Bobby Fischer once described his rival as saying, "What is time when one has it all?" And the interesting thing was that Karpov was a child wonder. He became an outstanding player even by the age of 4. His brilliance was showing. And at this point in time, when he was up for the world championship match, he was only 23 years old. Karpov is talking almost as though he's the old man in that quote that from you, Mel, but he was only 32. So he was not really an old man at all either, but he's obviously thinking of time as being this container that you pour your life into. And then it occurred to me, of course, that very objectively, the older we become, the more the limits of the length of life impose themselves on your thinking. And so this card is, for me, is more of a reminder to play, a reminder to don't look at the clock, a reminder to just have some time spaces marked out that are not boundaried by time, so that it doesn't feel like a container. And for me, that time is Sunday afternoons when I get to play with people's ideas and suggestions and just not ever have to even look at the clock until hunger pangs interpose and I have to stop and make dinner. So that's my 2-part card. And then, as is my process, when I'm ready to start putting the card away, I look at the different keywords that I've outlined in my tagline. Oh, I should show you my tagline. Time as a limited structure longs for limitless time of play. Because really, when you're starting to feel that the limitations of the time, that's when you're starting to remember fondly the time when you could play. So my keywords in that were time, limits, and play. Those are the ones I could find in my index. And one of the time ones was about Bardo time, which I really enjoy. That's the time between, the time separating one milestone from another, a pause point after the achievement of a milestone before going forward with the next one. This concept was introduced to me by Ken Caputo, who said that he's a teacher of martial arts, and whenever they have a belt ceremony where the recipient is going to a new belt level, they lay the new belt out in front, and he removes the old belt and places it behind and just remains between the two laid out belts for a time, pondering the time between. Interesting, but not really perfect. And another one was kind of really insightful for me personally, but maybe not for this card, that the idea of Lazarus at the gate, he's the one who begged for food and the rich men came in and ignored him day by day. And this was from a point where I was pondering after reading this scripture, that if Lazarus at my gate might be longing for some of my time. So that was a time issue, but again, not a perfectly good match. I had another one having to do with limits, which is acedia, a spiritual life upper limit problem, but not really related. And another one with limits. We must go to the limits of our potential, not weak, not pretentious, but again, not a match. I had an old title card that just said, reaching a higher plane. On speculation, I pulled that section out. No, it was interesting, but didn't relate. So that left me with one and only one card. Work that is yours is joyful. It's play. So I went for the card. Okay. It's from a Mark Twain quote. The work that is really a man's own work is play and not work at all. So when I follow my joy, my work seems not effortless, but not tiring either. And my tagline was work that's yours is joyful play. And so I had to ask this card what it felt. Did it feel as though this were its parent? And it was happy to choose this as its parent. So it got the next number in the sequence. Come on.
There you are.
I
I
feel
love
like
seeing
I
the
just
whole
had an
process
entire
like that.
lecture. Who
I've
else
got a
wants to just eavesdrop inside Kathleen's head?
oh
Is it just me?
yeah, no. No. Get in line. I've got a fancy down-facing camera right here. It's literally a carbon copy of Kathleen's own setup. I said, "How do you do this?" And she said, "Well, I've got this, this, and this, and I could also send you the collage of what didn't work." I said, "No, thank you." So yeah, I think I want to get a little bit more facile at being able to show the down-facing camera in these. Today's I'll just be reading. So we've talked. I've talked in previous episodes about time, and so I've got a growing area of time, and much like the numbering tells you, are you in the old city or are you in the new city? And my time area is in the old city, and it's kind of under a heading called metaphysics, and it's several layers down. But my personal reflection on the quote was that it takes as a given that time is a product of imagination. And he offers one other thing you could imagine, but it's not limited to that. So if we accept, or if I accept this as a premise, that time is a product of imagination, then there is freedom to imagine time from a mindset that is congruent with your own individual personality. Because, we're borrowing somebody else's imagination, some saturnine, that's a word I needed to look up. It's a good one.
Me too.
I have a teacher who, in speaking about time, he said, well, one thing I've learned, it's not something that you go through. So it's a similar thing. So that was my personal reflection on the quote, and my tagline was, time being of imagination frees you to think of it in multiple ways. And the parent card was from another personal reflection from sometime this year. I hadn't dated it. But it was, love time as though it is your child. It very well may be. It is a path to your source and the path back up to a power realm, having attained wisdom. To fear the loss of it is to mistake what would lose and what would be lost. So that's the parent of a little more lighthearted view. Got a playful kid.
Very interesting. Wow.
Yeah, all of this works until you have to have a meeting with somebody, you know?
At a certain time.
Right.
Well, I thought about that. Of course, I have meetings all the time, but thinking about, literally, coordination happens all over our planet without schedules.
Mhm.
I mean, the food I digested, I don't think that there's a clock inside there that's actually going tick, 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 tick. It's time to do that thing you do. But coordination happens. Now in the business world and all of that, that's not, you're not going to be successful in the business world when you operate like a, a
Subjectively.
dandelion fluff on the wind.
Right. Right.
And so you're, for that moment or those moments, perhaps people who succeed with, this process, they adopt that definition for the time that definition is needed to be happy amongst others. But they're not bound by it every hour of the day.
Mm-hmm. In
Container
this
hour.
book,
Yeah, I know.
in this book, the time shifting, one of the stories towards the beginning was of, this author taking a group of people to this wonderful island, retreat to talk about time shifting. And they were on a ferry. They were surrounded by beautiful scenery. There was even a rainbow in the sky. It was gorgeous, but there was a slight delay. The ferry wasn't going to leave right as soon as it was supposed to. And so he's just standing there, admiring all of the beauty around him. But then he sees one of the participants, a woman who was coming to this thing to learn how to be able to relax and enjoy life. And she is just distraught because when are we going to get there? We got to get to the place. And, she was just completely oblivious to all of the beauty and wonder around her. She wanted to get to the retreat, and she didn't realize it had already started, really, if she had just settled down and sort of pay attention, because she was already experiencing wonderful beauty if she'd just see it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that's an example of taking the business time of everything's got to be right at by the clock, and taking it into a situation where it's not warranted and it's not useful. And there's a better way to experience time in those situations.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of being alert enough to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like what I've been talking about in my newsletters lately of, having different models that fit, different models have different strengths and different weaknesses. And, if you get stuck on just one, then that's the only thing that you can see. But if you know many, then you can pick and choose the most appropriate ones for how you see the world and how you interact with it. I think this is more of the same.
Do you want to finish up then with where you filed your card?
And Victoria,
I will,
haven't
but
heard from
Victoria
either.
has, yeah.
I'll go. So this was very interesting because I've mentioned in other groups where we've been talking about writing specifically that, I'm trying to get the Zettelkastens for Fiction Writers book finished as quickly as I can, as thoroughly as I can. So I've just put my blinders on. But over here, my novel that is waiting to have its edit finished is constantly quacking at me. So when I read this, I immediately recognized this as something that's part of Marshall Branch, my main male character, because he is an old soul, literally. He's 138. And he's always thinking about time in this way. And because he was in the military, that was one very structured way of approaching his life and being systematic and being on time. And then he swung entirely the other direction in that he went to the ranch, complete control of how many people are within 100 miles of him at all times, and is only bound by the rising and setting of the sun. So he literally, the pendulum swung the other direction. So as I was thinking about this, I I open every chapter with a quote, and I absolutely want to swipe this because there's a section where he's kind of contemplating this, because now, as a result of the story and people that he's met and what have you, he's rediscovering that joy of being around people, and just the joys of living that can sometimes be time bound in terms of, let's meet at this time in this place, which is something that he does with the female lead. So he's having a conversation with himself in his head about how time looking forward feels slow. You're always anticipating, you're waiting. Time looking backward feels fast because it's already happened and you can immediately recall it. So these are things that he's grappling with as he's starting to kind of ease back into day-to-day living. And so for me, I put in my index, I put an entry under T for time theory in parentheses. I put under M for Thomas More, because I love St. Thomas More, so I knew I would remember it that way. So I did put an entry under M for More. And then I also made an author card for Stephen, is it Reckschafer, who wrote the book. So I made kind of a mock-up bib card and filed it there because his name's so weird. If I'm looking for this, I'm going to go to him to find it probably. But ultimately, there's a small section in Branch's character development where I put things that he would be thinking about. I mean, if you're that old, you're going to have time to think about all kinds of stuff. And that is one of the things that he thinks about quite often. And so for me, that was where it landed, in the section of his reflections where he's thinking about time backwards, which is that fast moving recall of events and things, versus time forwards, which is in his mind something that's more playful, something that's more alive, something that has the hope of romance, which makes that both playful and kind of frightening, but in a good way, because you're starting to think about, is this really possible? Could this really happen? So that's where it ultimately ended up for me. It's the fourth card in the section where he's kind of thinking about time forward and time backward and what his life going forward might mean, because this has very much brought him back to that playful teenager, first date jitters kind of mindset, which he's not experienced in a very long time. So that was where it landed for me. It was 100% a character card, character perspective. And I think it will probably end up either as an opening quote for one of these chapters that kind of grapple with this, or potentially I might cannibalize it a little bit and just sort of embed a shade of it in that inner monologue that he's having when he's thinking about it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Wow.
Well, when I went, first of all, this quote struck me because it felt like it could inform our Roanoke project. With the concept of time being, a child at play, perhaps this is one of the attitudes of one of the founders, something that we could play with. But when I went into my index, I didn't actually have very many entries for time. In fact, I only had one to time management. I'm like, well, actually, this card would fit in well there because this is sort of like a warning, don't do too much time management. So I looked through that category, and what it chose for its parent is a quote from John Ruskin, who was an art critic and architectural writer in the late 1800s. He wrote a book called Seven Lamps of Architecture, which is a huge and foundational work for the field of historic restoration. But he also wrote about art. And in the Seven Lamps of Architecture, he quoted an artist that he didn't name, who said that how he created his art was, well, you just have to know what you have to do and then do it. Simple, right?
Awesome.
Yeah. And Ruskin had commented a little bit on that, failure is less frequently attributable to either insufficiency of means or impatience of labor than to a confused understanding of the thing actually to be done. So I chose that, it chose that as its parent because, the concept of how do you even think about time is part of understanding what is to be done. Like, if you are applying time management skills to a vacation, then you're probably not going to be having as good of a time as if you were thinking of it in a different way. So I want that card in here at the very beginning of the time management section to remind me, don't get too caught up on managing time, which is something I'm not all that good at. That's why I keep trying to learn about it. Maybe I don't need to learn about it as much as I think I do.
Mm.
Oh, wow. How different all the cards are.
Yes, it's wonderful, the diversity of thoughts and places that we put them.
Yeah.
And I love the tie to the Roanoke project.
Yes. Yeah, does anybody have any further thoughts on that before we move on to the next activity?
Well,
On the time management or the time aspect,
To Roanoke, yeah.
I think absolutely. You said something, I think it was in our last episode, you talked about it being a whole planet, right?
Mhm.
And it always bugged me with Star Trek. As much as I love that show, they have a whole planet and they're talking to 20 people. And that seems to be everybody who lives on the planet and totally representative of the entire culture of the planet. So even if the original people who settled it on this planet were generally of the same mindset after generations and generations, and the ability to go other places and other people coming, they're going to be different ways of viewing the same thing, different facets of the gem. So I think that notion of time, especially, I love the idea of really playing with how long has it been anyway? How do we even know how long something has been? Because if I think about in our culture now, you'll hear some language and you'll get a sense of that sounds like the way they talked in the 50s.
Mm.
And how does that even happen? How does that get transmitted into something where a 64-year-old woman in 2024 has that idea of how a certain set of words places something in a decade before she was born?
Oh, wow. Interesting. Well, when I thought about time in a Roanoke project, I immediately wonder, we know the play aspect of that card is huge with the ancestors because they've hidden all these things in plain sight. They've set things up as a game. So when you think of it as a game, I think of it as a game with a purpose, a collection of games that collectively cause a dawning of understanding. So then we have the question of what is this understanding? Well, perhaps this understanding is something related to time and the duration. Maybe the ancients have actually escaped time. And maybe that's what the game is, it could be leading the explorers to, is how to escape from time at all.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was
think
thinking about was but I'm not so sure this is Roanoke, but the idea is Western culture, well, cultures and time orientation, um, where the West is clock oriented or clock based, and the East is event related. right? And how is that resolved? You know, how did the Roanokeans or the Blinkers or what did we uh, did they solve that or did they address that? Is that addressed in how they do what they do? Um, I don't know. I'm not even. I'm still researching or starting to research event related Eastern. What is that? What does that look like? What does that mean? You know, because definitely I know clock, but event based. Um, my understanding is here that flexible boundaries, relationship focused, and spontaneous interactions. Okay, those are nice buzzwords, but what does that look like in action? You know, so uh, anyway, I just wanted to pop that in.
For what it's worth, and I'm, I'm as much of a rookie writer as you, Deb, but I find having a question like that and then just trying to write the story, you see things. I don't know that you see truth, but you see things that make for interesting parts of the story.
When you see a question like what Mel posed,
No, what you just posed. The post about what, the things that you read is like the buzzwords. What does it feel like in action?
Right. Definitely a starting point, right? Okay.
Yeah.
We're really on the same wavelength, Julianne, when you said the Star Trek thing, because that was exactly what I was thinking of when I said we have a whole planet. Because I was thinking of Star Trek and their one culture and one government per planet.
Yeah.
Like
so much
more complicated.
To be Southern California.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
All right, well, we have a little bit more time left.
Yeah.
And so for the second activity, I suggested, well, I forget what it's called, but it's the one where we spin a wheel and get a letter and all look up that letter in our indexes and find an interesting card that pops up from that letter. So I have just spun the wheel and we have U as our letter.
You.
Which could be interesting because, well,
this
we'll
is
see how
going to
much
be
we got
fast. Yeah, it's blank. This is not good.
Well, this happened the first time we tried this exercise, so I figure, try the one closest to it or try the author box and see
I
what
got
you
it. I'm just bumping up a letter. I got it.
Okay, I got mine.
Well, I found a spoiler.
All right, I think most of us have found something. Kathleen, would you like to start since I think we're the first?
Okay. You, the term was uninterestedness. And this is a quote from J.V. Sham. Well, actually, it's not a quote, it's just a paraphrase. That J.V. Sham, in the introduction to Sertalange's The Intellectual Life, was talking about that there's really, he quotes Chesterton, who says there's no such thing as an uninteresting subject, only uninterested people. And Sham goes on to say that he thinks that this uninterestedness is because we have never learned to see what is there, both how to see and why to see. And this one jumped out at me because it wants to have it as a child, or it wants to link to your card, Mel, of the rainbow and the beautiful, beautiful view from the ferry that isn't leaving on time. So just not knowing how to see the rainbow.
All right, I guess I'll go ahead and go next. I had a phrase, tagline in my index that was deep understanding leads to good writing. So when I pulled that card, I discovered that it was a reaction to a quote from Zettelkastens in the Intellectual Life, where he wrote, "The secret of writing is to stand and study things ardently until they speak to you, and themselves determine their own expression." And so my reaction on that card, deep understanding leads to good writing, is deep attention and study leads to deep understanding. Writing is only difficult when we have a superficial understanding of a subject. Lacking a foundation, we try to cover over it with eloquence. But the foundation of deep understanding, whether from studying books or from studying things directly, can be expressed in simple language with little difficulty. And I also had another card, which was from a different book, Bibliography for Beginners, which sounds really dry, but it was actually quite interesting. And the quote that I wrote down from that was, "Bibliography is the bedrock of all scholarship. Once you have sunk your foundation securely into it, you can safely build to any height that your intelligence and imagination will lift you to." So, it's all talking about the same sort of thing, understand deeply first, and then the writing comes easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've always argued there is no such thing as writer's block. I just don't believe in it. The root of that problem is the writer doesn't know enough about the world they're trying to write, which makes it slippery, and you can't grab on to the details to write your pathway through. So I always argue, I never called it your zone of fascination, but I always said, go back and read the things that light you up, and I guarantee you will fix your writer's block.
Where were you?
So with that, I should go because I don't have anything under U. So I just flip to the next letter, which is V. And of course, the thing that is all over the page is the Voynich manuscript, which is the reason that I started writing my novel. So I've been fascinated with that manuscript for as long as I can remember. I mean, just, my parents were hippies. They were fascinated with stuff like that. So it is what it is. But I think when I first started writing the book, the novel, I knew that I wanted a manuscript to be at the heart of it. I was pretty certain that I wanted it to be the Voynich, because to this day it has still never been read or even come close to being able to decipher it. And so I thought, well, if I give the book a relationship with a person, wouldn't that be a cool way to start building the story? And so then I was off to the races. And it's funny because then if I go backwards a letter to T, it takes me to the next piece of the story that was developed, which is the Terra Feminarium, which is kind of, you could call them Baltic seafaring women that lived on this island, Terra Feminarium, which is off the coast of Tallinn in the bay, in the Baltic Sea. And that's where my main female character's family comes from. So it's like on either side of you, I found the two first things that really laid the foundation for the story as I started writing it. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Wow. I don't have a you. This is my Zettelkasten. You see it?
It's small but mighty.
And not organized, you know, and ergo no you. I'm sure there's a use in here somewhere, but I just keep doing cards, and I have faith that I will get this together. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's it.
Uh, the thing about simple words when you understand what it is that you're writing about, it brought me back to Kathleen, you talking about Nicholas Luhmann's approach to the Zettelkasten, because he didn't prize simplicity. He apparently adored the complexity. And I don't know, I have no idea whether he took pride in how hard his works were to read, but that's not to say that he didn't understand it. It's just a different, it's a different avenue. And maybe it's a different avenue in terms of who you think your audience is. But I certainly vibe with that notion. When I have experienced blocks in composing, it has invariably been because I haven't been clear. So my card that I pulled out is from my original brainstormy treatment of Roanoke itself. The operating norm that linked understanding is perfect understanding. And I remember when I read that out, Victoria went, ooh. Which is
Yikes.
the right reaction. So, I think that a lot of, what my personal reflection on that is that our society has numerous examples of trade-offs that we have made in favor of convenience. And so it's a slippery slope that the linked people will go down, just as we see it. Like, how long does it take when you are trying to remember who was the guy who was in that movie that I saw before you go to IMDb and just let it, get you off of your memory. I forced myself over the last couple of days. I could not remember Jane Austen's name. I was remembering every work of fiction, but not her name. And I just said, I am not going to look that up. Obviously, it finally came.
That is hilarious. I did exactly that yesterday. I saw a trailer for a show, and there were 5 actors that I absolutely recognized, but I could not figure out why. Some of them, like one gal is from a movie that's probably 12 years old. I don't watch a lot of movies, so I tend to remember them pretty well. But I couldn't remember what movies these people were from. And I did that very thing. I'm laying in bed this morning around 4 a.m. when I usually wake up. And I'm like, okay, I'm like the petulant child. No, I'm not going to look it up. I'm going to remember it. And I laid there until I figured out who all 5 of them were.
Good for you.
I'm going to win.
No heating of the time, just playing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, so I feel more and more that, just the notion of understanding and what even is perfect understanding. This is really starting to emerge as a very rich storyline. Yeah. The ancestors who set up this thing are not unaware.
Oh, no. Yeah, I would say
And they
have
may
all
have
the...
even had a reason to use this. Yeah. But how in control of that were they? Because human beings will surprise you.
Well, since with the gamesmanship of the world, I think the contrast between intent and result can be something that's really funny, depending on how we write it. But yeah.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. Oh.
Just
That's
oopsie.
in, yeah, right. It's in my notes. I don't
Yeah.
have my notes done yet, but I have a good heading. So I'm starting to see a path. The story is way less slippery to me now. I'm starting to be able to see kind of a way, but it's not a linear path. It's more like a fractal path. But I'm just listening very carefully as everyone talks about different aspects of the story, and I think it's going to be really cool. It's going to be really cool.
Mel, what did you come up with under the letter U?
Oh, I said it was the deep understanding leads
Oh,
to good
that's-
writing.
yeah.
Yes. But Julianne, you mentioned Luhmann and how he wrote, and my understanding, what I've read, is that he deliberately wrote in a really complicated and difficult manner because he was trying to keep basically people who weren't qualified to, in his opinion, to understand his thinking from even being able to read it at all. And so, yeah, there's definitely some hubris and pride there. But that's what I've read, is that he was deliberately very, especially with his sociological writings, very complicated, just to sort of weed out people who weren't able to follow it, because he didn't feel that he needed to talk to them, I guess. I don't know. But it's very easy to do in German. And I saw this quote and I don't remember where it was from. It may have even been from Luhmann. But this person was describing different languages and said that like French is like this well-tended park with wide spaced trees, and German is this tangled thicket where you can get lost very easily and never return. And
Right?
having spent some years studying German, this is true.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, well, I've just started to write a little scene for Roanoke.
Oh.
This won't be a spoiler, but it's a sequel to Jenna having gotten into the vault. Now she's getting to look at some cards in the vault,
Oh.
but she can't just go poking through because there are rules to the game. And so Grandpa limits her to a maximum of 3 cards. And she has to figure out, well, how am I going to select 3 cards? And so the first question she asks is, how are these cards ordered? And he said, oh, well, that's good. That's a good question. It's alphanumeric. And she said, what alphabet? And she gets a little treat for that one.
Plot twist. Nice.
Wow.
Very nice. I just want to get it done so I can read the book.
Well, speaking of time, I suppose that once we settle on a little bit more of a framework, then time will kind of work itself out. I don't know whether the rest of you are using some of your, you have other things that you do in life, right? As do I. But how often you're spending working on Roanoke. But at a certain point, I suppose it's going to gain its own momentum, and it'll be beyond the confines of this weekly show where we share things with each other. But I'll be interested to see how we come up with, how often or in what format will we want to meet and debate things and keep it private and decide what goes to the fans and all of that. Got no idea.
Yeah.
Well, I have
It's
ideas.
organic.
I don't know whether they'll work.
That's okay. We'll figure it out. That's
Yeah.
what drafting is for.
That's a good point. Yeah.
We'll figure it out. And you get to a point where you've kind of bubbled up enough material that it almost becomes a self-sorting system, because you start to know, okay, this has to come before that. And then we can slip this in the middle. I mean, things just start to begin to make sense. But that'll happen.
Deb has always has a quizzical look, like, will it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was actually looking through my papers, and that's what the quizzical look was related to.
Ah.
Not what Victoria said. No. 'Cause I'm still back at clock-based and event related. Sorry.
Awesome.
Well, I'm sure that's going to show up in Roanoke.
Yeah.
An interesting time. I remember talking to my sister-in-law, who was born and raised in Nicaragua. And she expressed to me how strange it was coming to the United States, how time changed dramatically when she arrived in the United States. She said in Nicaragua, a morning was an unbelievably long time. You got up, you probably took a walk, you spent some time in the garden, you enjoyed the flowers, you had coffee with your friends, you walked places, you maybe bought food for dinner, it just this enormous number of activities that just took a morning, and none of them felt like they were rushing from one to the other. They all felt like they had all the time in the world to play out. And then she gets to the United States and she walks in and it's like, you wake up and it's noon. What happened to the time? She was actually wondering whether time was actually moved faster in the United States than it moved in Nicaragua.
Oh,
That's a cool question.
that is.
How did she acclimate? What did she do? What was the?
She kind of got caught up into it because, needing to get well, first of all, she's raising a family. And then when the kids were in school, getting a job, and everybody's on a clock. So they're all moving to clock time. Now she's retired and enjoys, they live in Southern California, but they spend the cold winters in Nicaragua.
On event time, right?
Yeah, so she's back to
That
gardening,
is hilarious.
visiting, and doing all of the things, and she's back to a slower pace. But I need to ask her, when she's in Southern California in the summers, doing her gardening and doing the things she does as a retired person, does time move faster still?
Yeah.
And I haven't. I now feel the need to ask her that.
Ask her if you don't mind her appearing in Roanoke somewhere.
Ooh.
That perspective is really valuable.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and come back and let us know what she said, please, please,
Yeah.
please.
I will do that.
Okay,
Oh,
guys,
well,
I've got to
speaking.
jump.
Yeah, well, there's one last thing that Julianne, I believe, mentioned the fans. How do our fans find us?
Oh,
Where can they go to get more information?
they can go to lilypub.org. And once you get over to lilypub.org, you will find both a place where you can join Lilypub if you want to be in on the closest you can be to what's going on with Roanoke. But there's another one where you can just sign up for notifications of what's going on. And when you do that, you'll get, by return email, you'll get a whole list of information, and you'll get a link to where we post things. So you can keep up to date as just a spectator. But if you actually want to participate and converse about the story and maybe influence its direction, you do that over as a member of lilypub.org. Hope to see you there.
Yay.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Mel.
Who's going to host next time?
Whose
Yeah.
turn is it? I could do it. I've forgotten whose turn it is.
I don't remember
I-
whose turn it is either.
I
We also have a
shouldn't.
spinner.
I have guests all weekend, so it's going to be, I won't do a very good job if I do it. But I can do the one after, if we do it, because I think that's Thanksgiving weekend.
Okay, I'll do it.
Sounds
You got your
good.
newsletter out of the way so you can.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a
He's
good
got
time to
all the
find-
time now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, except I'm working, of course, on my Zettelcasting course and my new book. Oh, what fun.
All right.
Well, thank you,
until
Mel. That
next
was an
week.
excellent session.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yep.
All right. See you everybody next week.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.